So hello everyone that's just joining us for this webinar. We're just waiting for participants to filter through. So we'll maybe start in the next sort of 30 seconds to a minute as we're waiting for people to filter through. But a very warm welcome to you all. So without further ado, as I say, a very warm welcome to everyone. I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on using a whole systems approach to deliver at-scale climate action projects, focusing on the Glasgow City Innovation District vision. As you'll see, this is part of a broader series of webinars being held by the Centre, or the newly established Centre for Sustainable Development here at Strathclyde. We're really excited for the centre. We had a fantastic launch last Thursday where we had our own Principal and Vice Chancellor, Sir Jim MacDonald, giving the opening address. And we had a wonderful guest speaker in the form of Joyce Msuya, who's the Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme. It was a fantastic event and followed by some really insightful and really exciting webinars, which we hope this one today will follow suit with. First of all, we do have a Q&A function in this webinar. The Q&A function is one of the things that makes the webinar a bit more interactive for everyone. So if you do have any questions or any comments at any point, please do feel free to put them in the Q&A function. We also have the ability to vote up questions. So if you see a question in the Q&A function that you really like the look of, or you'd really like our panelists to answer, then you can give it a thumbs up in the Q&A function. So as I say, we've had some fantastic webinars previously. We've had webinars on electricity grids and the abatement of fossil fuels. We've had a webinar from Sahari Burns on public health and well-being. And we've had a webinar on the vertically integrated programme for sustainable development, which is a programme that the university runs about getting teachers and students more involved in sustainable development. So we're following on from that webinar with this one, the fourth in our series. We have some fantastic panelists for you. To start with, we've got Dr. Roddy Yar, who's the Assistant Director of Sustainability and Environmental Management at the University of Strathclyde. Roddy's enthusiasm and passion for sustainability and passion for what he does within the university just shines through in everything, every project that he leads. And I'm sure this will come across in his webinar and his presentation shortly. Roddy's currently leading on a vision for climate neutral districts in Glasgow, where we'd hope to look towards the carbon neutral target of 2030 that Glasgow has, and further to the 2045 target of being net zero in Glasgow. So this could be, or should be, a really important step towards both of those goals. So Roddy's also an alum of the University of Strathclyde, which is fantastic. It's really great to see someone who's studied at Strathclyde working in this area and continuing to build and develop Strathclyde's reputation, particularly around sustainable development. The next speaker we have lined up for you is Gavin Slater, who I'm delighted to say is also an alum of the University of Strathclyde. Gavin is currently the Head of Sustainability at Glasgow City Council and leads on a number of projects around the city concerned with renewable energy, with sustainability, engaging communities, and the wider climate emergency, including the Climate Emergency Implementation Plan that's being developed. Some of these projects include a 24 million Horizon 2020 or 20 million Horizon 2020 project called Ruggedized, which I'm sure Gavin will talk to you more about later on. But without further ado, I'll hand you over to Roddy to start his presentation, and I really hope you enjoy the webinar. So over to you, Roddy.
Thanks, Tom. Will the slides appear? Do I need to do anything?
They should do if you share them.
Sorry, where are they? I thought you would just put them up.
Oh, sure. I'll share them for you.
Sorry, ladies and gents.
Okay. There we go. Should be able to see those.
Thanks very much, Tom, and thanks to all at the Centre for Sustainable Development for inviting me along today. It's great to be here. The sun's shining, and it's interesting times that we're living in. So I'm delighted to represent the Centre today and to take you through this discussion. And hopefully it is a discussion. It's not just me and Gavin talking at you. Very much want feedback on the vision that we're presenting here. So really it is about sharing a vision for a climate neutral innovation district, and we'll explore what that means, obviously, using a whole systems approach to deliver at scale and at speed climate action in the innovation district that's within Glasgow city centre. And that whole systems approach we'll discuss as we go through. Clearly there's a huge amount of transformation needed, but we start our journey at the very birthplace of Glasgow on High Street, which is the mural you're looking at here, which is of St Mungo and the robin that he has on his finger there, which he brought back to life. St Mungo being the patron saint of Glasgow and the mighty kingdom of Strathclyde. So I thought it'd be fitting to put that up as a kind of a touchstone, insofar as, you know, I look upon this challenge as a new opportunity for the city and for the region and for Scotland. And the innovation district, by its very name, is about innovation, new thinking, global thinking, but also, I think, importantly, local thinking. So what better place to start that journey? I'll just try and move on the slide. I'm not sure if I, yeah. So a bit of context, and you're on this call, I presume, because it's not just my radiant sense of humor that's attracted you to this. It's about what is this all about, and you're in this space, you're working on climate action. The reports are coming thick and fast, and these are just a few that I think are pertinent. The emissions gap, that's an annual report that defines how close we are to getting to that net zero trajectory, and it's fair to say we're a way off that kind of target. I guess something like 7.6%, and growing. The longer we leave it, the steeper that trajectory becomes, and we're all conscious of that. The recently, I think it was yesterday, the Climate Change Committee report, which came out recommending a pathway and updating their commentary on the Scottish Government's kind of climate change trajectory and making recommendations. The Infrastructure Commission, which is featured here in terms of prioritising the infrastructure that we need, and I very much agree with the infrastructure piece that's mentioned here. And it is also about community and sustainable places, as the report notes. And these are all worth reading if you're working in this space. And obviously the climate change plan, which we have before us, and which is being refreshed as we speak. So it's fair to say that my role at the university as operational practitioner with responsibility for climate change and social responsibility, and now the net zero transition, which is challenging but exceptionally interesting, it is something that we really do need to tackle at scale and at speed. It's hugely transformational what we need to do here, and I'm sure you all appreciate that. I certainly do. Scotland is leading, I think it's fair to say, but there's a way to go. The power sector is obviously decarbonised, and that is fantastic. That's really helped us, and I'm sure many of you on the call, to get to your decarbonisation targets. But there's so much more that's needed. Heat in particular, transport, and also adaptation. Climate change is here. We need to adapt to the climate. We're seeing more intense rainfall, strangely intensive storms, and that's all about resilience of our infrastructure, and most importantly, resilience of our communities. And that social inclusion piece and our community engagement is not lost on me, and I'm sure yourselves as well. So that's a wee bit of context. Tom, if you could move on. Getting into a wee bit more detail about how we might change things for the positives that are out there. BEIS and the Royal Academy of Engineering have commented on this, about clean growth and the innovation that's needed in this space. And I always try and think of innovative solutions. My day job is all about coming up with solutions and deploying those, and that needs to be at scale now. So new ideas, and we've all got good ideas, but also trying and doing. You know, the recommendations of the Royal Academy of Engineering are about these kind of pilot schemes. And that's really where I'm trying to get to with this piece of work and this vision. Is we really need to put our toe in the water and try and think how we can bring together at scale propositions for the market and the public sector and academia to get behind. Obviously at the university we've got huge amounts of experience in this area in terms of energy and climate, so we want to put that to work as well. So that's really a major part of this vision as well. Next slide, Tom, thanks. So joining the dots and coordination. A lot of my job is about talking to people and building those relationships and networks. And I think to create this vision, you know, that's come out of conversations, ideas, and sparking new ways of thinking. And I think that's reflected by you know, others in this area. And it needs to be coordinated. It needs to be achievable, but it also needs to be ambitious, and it needs to be now. And I think the Royal Academy reflects that here. And I've seen it mention, you know, the kind of whole systems approach, and that really does capture my imagination as how we might put this work together to really deploy it at scale. And Energy UK reflected that in one of their reports recently. Next slide. So a whole systems approach. This is an interesting slide for me anyway. So I've put at the top of the page the whole systems approach kind of formal definition, and it is all about joining together all of the different elements, and this is exceptionally challenging to achieve, but it is about using the physical and natural resources that we've got at hand, with people at the centre, using good data, and then delivering the policy, the commercials, and the funding to make the change happen that ultimately results in better health and well-being, brings forward skills, brings forward jobs, and different behaviours. There's a lot in there, obviously. So boiling that down into something that perhaps is more understandable for me anyway, is still game, where you've got a dynamic of people, all of whom on their own are interesting characters with good ideas, but as a collective, that's much more powerful. And they can, you know, that's what makes still game work for me. It's that collective kind of togetherness and how they spark off each other. So we've got plenty of strong characters in the city, and we've got plenty of people who've got good ideas, And I think we can put them to work and together. And moving to the right of that formula there, then using the natural resources, which ironically for Glasgow include a lot of water, which quite often falls from the sky, but flows right through the heart of the city. The heat potential of the Clyde and the ability for the Clyde to manage the adaptation, and we need to help it to do that, is at our fingertips. And we're now turning our sights towards the Clyde, which is tremendous to see through things like Clyde Mission, Clyde Rebuilt, and the Clyde Waterfront. So that collective drive, all rowing in the same direction, put together with good people and good ideas, I'm thinking could result in a proposition that's very powerful for us as 100% renewable heat, power, transport, adaptation and well-being plan for our community. So I've tried to distill in that phraseology there the climate action solution and the process, I guess, that we need to go through to get there. Next slide, Tom. And this kind of whole systems approach is important. And my sense is, from having been at Strathclyde now for 5 years and having previously worked in Glasgow in the private sector, there's a lot goes on in Glasgow. It's a vibrant city. It's full of ideas. It's full of developments. It's full of kind of forward thinking. And these are just some of the examples. This is by no means a complete list. And this is kind of the city centre of Glasgow and the various regeneration areas or planning areas. These projects are all proceeding now. They've all either got planning or they're in the planning, they're in development. There's funding packages attached to many of these, and they're all going to do great work. But are they going to solve the net zero conundrum and the dilemma and the carbon neutral target that Glasgow has set itself, which is great to see, and our university target of net zero by 2040 or sooner is incredibly challenging. As someone who's kind of deployed infrastructure throughout their whole career, I can see how challenging this is. And we need to join these infrastructure projects and developments and planning together to make this happen. And I saw the Climate Commission report recommending that NPF4 really starts to think and to enable the planning process to facilitate what we're saying here. So yeah, I think it's a really important thing to think about the city linkages, and that's something that's very much at the front of my mind, and that's why I think I'm working together with Gavin to try and bring forward these solutions in this space. Thanks, Tom. So the Innovation District, the Glasgow City Innovation District, I shouldn't take it for granted that everybody knows what that is. If you're not from within Glasgow, then it's probably worth saying that it's a global hub for entrepreneurship, innovation and collaboration. Led and anchored by the University of Strathclyde. We're right in the centre of that space, which looks like a flattened pigeon, but that's another story perhaps. And it is home to innovation. I think that's really important, and it's fitting and it's aligned with the net zero transition. And it's with other partners, and again, that's collaboration. I think that's a theme that needs to come forward even more in this kind of climate space, with Glasgow City Council, Scottish Enterprise, our colleagues at Glasgow Chamber of Commerce and Entrepreneurial Scotland. So it's up and running, and my aspiration for it is that it's climate neutral. So it doesn't just deliver really important innovation and research and kind of delivery of economic solutions. It also thinks about the climate and our responsibility to the climate and to communities and the social impact within the space. And my hope that what we do here is replicable across a number of other innovation districts and city regions, and also rural and semi-rural areas as well. So let's just a wee bit about the innovation district. Next slide, Tom. So yeah, apologies for this handmade drawing, but this is the climate neutral innovation district, and you might be able to make out the sense of a bird that's been placed onto the map there as a flattened pigeon. stretching from the motorway right down to the banks of the Clyde and just over the bridge, and from the east end into the city centre. I think it's about 170 hectares of space, and my contention is that that space could and should be 100% renewable heat, power, transport, adaptation, and delivering well-being for our community. And I've highlighted some of the communities that are in and around that space: Townhead and Ladywell, Tennants and Drygate, as at the factory and the housing, Colton, the Clyde itself, Gorbals, and obviously the Merchant City and the city centre in Trongate, and the university at the heart of that space. And you'll see highlighted there a high street climate corridor. And that phrase, climate corridor, is something that I think we need to start thinking about, and I'll explain why in a moment or two. So that's the proposition, and you'll see that there are heat pumps crudely drawn within the Clyde, and depending on who you talk to, there's between 200 and a gigawatt of heat potential in the Clyde because of the scale of its catchment, available to the city in some shape or form. And there's also obviously the heat map for Glasgow and the city, and Polmadie is nearby. And there are other forms of heat as well, which we'll get into a wee bit. So that's the proposition in that sort of crude sense. Next slide, Tom. So the scope of what we're doing within that space is thinking about obviously the buildings, legacy in terms of the existing housing and the commercial stock, and new developments obviously coming forward, and there are numerous in this area of Glasgow and within the Innovation District. And we're obviously doing our work within the Innovation Centre for TICZone. So the buildings to be, and the infrastructure supporting them, to be energy carbon neutral, and also adapted to the climate impacts, to make the city zone here and its communities resilient. That's the sort of simple definition, as I see it, of climate neutral. And we can debate what that means and what that looks like, but that's it in a nutshell there. Integrating with planned developments is a key element. So this isn't anything that we want to do as kind of new per se. It's about integration with the city's planned developments, and the work that's in and around that. And Gavin will talk about LHEs, I'm sure. The avenues, the City Deal funded avenues, Clyde Mission as I referred to, and obviously really importantly the low emission zone that sits on the east side of this development. And it is about affordable heat, whatever exactly that is, and that means different things to different people. It is about green infrastructure, adaptation, trees, biodiversity, green space, people that need access to shade and shelter, and that kind of green infrastructure and the biodiversity elements of that. Trees are really important to cities, and Glasgow's no different. Active travel is really important at this time with COVID, but also beyond that. Pedestrians first is a principle we're applying here. Access and placemaking, obviously, at the core of thinking, and fundamentally community health and well-being as being a key output of this work. So that's kind of the scope of what it is we're talking about. Next slide. And then, this is a bit of detail, but the climate neutral, obviously we can't boil the ocean. What we've put before you here, I think, is quite ambitious in its own, but we can't solve all the issues that are around here. So we are focusing on CO2 from fossil fuel emissions, and looking at that renewable solution for that, thinking about how we can sequester at some scale and add value in that sense through green infrastructure and tree planting, and how that also responds to adaptation and overheating in the city. And we'll see how we get on with other non-CO2 emissions, which are equally important, perhaps not in the city sense, but at a softer sense in terms of food consumption and how that responds within the city's communities. And then really importantly, we must not ever forget the climate risk assessment adaptation measures that we will deliver as part of this assessment, because that is a reality right now, as I said before. So we are working on that piece as well as part of this discussion. Next slide. So I thought it'd be good to present a wee example of what I think could be delivered, and hopefully you are familiar with the avenues as a project and a concept. And the university is really supportive of the avenues, and we can't wait for the avenue up Cathedral Street and George Street to arrive, North Hanover Street as well. So we're really supportive of this kind of redivision, reallocation of space along the avenues. That's great to see. But my proposition is that we need to go further. When we're doing big infrastructure pieces of work, we need to dig once and try and get it right as best we can when we're thinking about infrastructure. So whilst it's a really important and great vision for the avenues, and it does improve pedestrian cycling and adaptation, and hopefully transportation within the city, public transportation, I think we can go further. And I think the next slide starts to get into that. So climate corridors in our streets. So my poor drawing, I don't have a graphic design degree, you can tell. But I'm saying here, we've kind of talked about heat pumps. The climate corridor that could be High Street could act as a conduit to distribute climate solutions along it. So if you imagine district heating, which is going to be needed in the city at scale, and access to affordable heat, if that was to be placed beneath the 600 mil that the avenues we'll be looking at, then we start to create an exciting proposition in terms of infrastructure that can respond to the climate. And if you imagine a cycle path with district heating pipes below it that's readily accessible, and we think about digital connectivity and communications, we think about HV within the city in terms of reinforcement of the grid to enable electrification. That all needs to be delivered, and that's really challenging, and you'll see a photograph in a minute or two of what that looks like when you do open the ground up, because I've been there. It looks very simple in this drawing, and I absolutely totally get that it's not simple, but none of this is. But I do think the point of this is we do need to join up infrastructure works, and go back to my previous slide that showed the various developments in the city. We need to join the thinking up and start to maybe projectize some of our thinking on this to make it happen much more easy, and create a proposition that the market can start to look at for heat, active travel, digital adaptation, and the resultant air quality improvements and well-being and improved connectivity and access to services for our communities. So I think we need to dig once if we can, so we don't keep digging up the streets, which is something we never seem to learn. And I think to de-risk, most importantly, to de-risk these sorts of solutions for potential investors is very much in my thinking. And there's a big public sector opportunity here for organisations that are within the innovation district and within the city, and also the housing aspects that go in and around the innovation district. So that's a bit of a crude explanation of what that might look like, but hopefully you get the gist of it. Next slide. So I mentioned the photograph that would maybe capture your imagination. This is the district heating energy scheme that the university invested in, and lots of cities have got them, and Glasgow's got several, and that's what's under the ground. It can be done, but it's challenging. But all the more reason to get it right first time, and not return again and again and again, and to think about the future-proof nature of how we need to install infrastructure at scale so that we can get easy access to services, and we don't have to untie the knitting or work around the knitting that sits below the ground when you do open it up. And this is Richmond Street at the university, it's Cathedral Street, it's George Street. So these are places that the university and its contractor, in this case Vital Energy, has been into and worked on and covered over again. And we've our district heating systems working away. Next slide. So what we're going to be doing, just quickly skimming through this, and I'm happy to take any technical questions on this offline, but it'll be a series of technical reports that will be produced with a matrix of solutions, covering all of the factors that you might imagine. What are the existing plans? What's the reduction potential? How can these solutions be integrated? Do heat pumps work with high temperature systems? Do they need to be hybrid? What do we need to do to make our fabrics in our buildings be able to receive these new solutions that are low carbon? Is it deliverable? Where does the risk sit? How fundable, operable does this whole system look like? And that's at the core of it. What would the cost be like? So we obviously need to work out what the CapEx and OpEx is going to be, to then start to rank and prioritize and have that discussion, and think about the commercial modelling, finance and resource plan with a route map. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, what we're going to be doing. Standard kind of project plan for this work. And again, it's really important to, as I say, as my boss would say, projectize things. And that's at the core of it as well. So that's challenging to do, but we need to do it for this sort of endeavour to work. Next slide. So who will be doing the work? So we did a PIN notice, I think in 2019. That resulted in a procurement exercise with huge number of interested bids, all of which were excellent. But the team we've arrived at now is ourselves, the council, Atkins as lead consultant, keying into the Catapult, UK Energy Systems Catapult. An interesting group of well-kent faces, the Ouija board, and perhaps some are on the call just now, I don't know. I'm sure Dave will be on the call, hopefully asking tricky questions. But no, he's working on this as well, so that's fantastic. That group will be a really important part of the delivery piece. Ikigai Capital and Smarter Grid Solutions. So again, thinking about funding and obviously the grid piece, which is really important in terms of electrification of heat and of transport, and all of the grid issues and reinforcement issues that perhaps follow that, and opportunities as well in terms of virtual power platforms, distributed energy, and flexible grid services. We've got a steering group, so I reached out to a number of contacts and relationships that we've got at the university, and thankfully lots of people came back. So on the right of the slide you'll see the names of the organisations involved, and it's great to have this level of interest. It's exciting to have this level of interest, and we've already had a meeting of the steering group which was full of ideas and enthusiasm, and you can see the nature of the folk that are involved here. And I think that just is testament to this sort of idea that people are supportive, understanding of the challenges, but it's an exciting period that we're entering into here. So hopefully we'll be successful. Next slide. Many project managers amongst you will be interested in this slide. It's all about methodology and milestones, and apologies for the size of it. It's not the easiest to read, but safe to say that there's a project program, and it's going to live and breathe on the amount of data and the availability and access to good data at the front end. The assessment process that follows that, in terms of analysing that data, and then framing that into an assessment of the solutions and the deliverability and the selection process of those solutions, and then into financing and resourcing, and resulting in a route map at the end of it. And within this, there are lots of subtleties around things like, how do we display this for people to make it accessible so it's easy to understand what is and isn't possible? What does the ranking structure look like? Can we visualize this for people at all levels, in terms of academic colleagues, funders, the local community, the university community, people living in the area, and so forth. So there's a whole lot of work in here. Probably won't be delivered in this piece of work, but we're very conscious of, and I'm very conscious of, but we need to make this stuff accessible, because I'm quite a visual person, and I like to be able to kind of imagine what things might look like, hence why I do very poor drawings, but at least it makes sense to me. Next slide. I have to mention trees here, and it seems like a strange one, but out of sync, but it is so important, and colleagues, at Clyde Valley Green Network. I've got this idea for a Clyde climate forest to really up the canopy across the city and the region. And that is so important because it's going to be needed for adaptation and for mitigation purposes, and perhaps even for offsetting purposes at some level. So we're all grappling with how we tackle net emissions. So perhaps tree planting and Scottish Government's aspirations around that are supportive. I think we really need to get these into the city to make our city even greener. I know it's the wee green place, but I think it could be even greener. So yeah, really important to think about trees. Next slide. I'm getting there, by the way. I'm not too much longer to go. So yeah, context for kind of opportunities and green recovery. This is really important. I think there are opportunities which I'm presenting here, and I'm also conscious of challenges, and there are lots of challenges. But opportunity-wise, how do we deliver this? There is a skills gap, but that's an opportunity to really think about how we upskill young and old to get involved in this, and think about how we create local jobs in retrofit for decarbonisation. The digital world, my two boys are both doing computer science, so does that mean that young people are more into software design and hardware and get the digital age? I think yes, that's clearly the future, and we need to think about the skills in that area because it can help with climate mitigation and adaptation as well. The green investment that this provides, and the standards that we need to increasingly introduce into our buildings, when we to make our buildings able to cope with current mitigation and adaptation solutions going forward. That needs to change, and that needs good people to deliver it. And the construction sector is very engaged in this. I know this because obviously we talk to them, but there's a real opportunity there for new people to come into the space and to deliver these kind of passive house and interfit solutions for new build and refurbishment respectively. And the deployment of infrastructure, because this is a huge opportunity in the infrastructure commission has obviously echoed that, and there are opportunities in there for jobs and for communities to get involved directly and deliver the urban realm that we all want to see, that is climate responsive in that sense. So some of the challenges, I think, in the next slide, we all know the scale of the challenge is great. We need to quadruple our universities' emissions reduction trajectory. That's incredibly challenging, and we can't do it on our own. We need to work together, which is why we're joining up as best we can with others to kind of try and think about how we can deliver this. We need to build capacity right across the board. One of our aspirations at the university is to have all staff and students carbon literate, just to get to a certain level of understanding, so there is a contribution. People know what they can do to help, however small or however large that is. It's complex. It's time. It takes time to bring these projects forward. So if you think about 2030, it's not very long. If you're thinking about developments of projects, that takes time, and that's a big challenge. I do think the process needs to be projectized, and I think that requires a different way of thinking, less silo, more collaborative, and more joined up. And then obviously the cost. I think the metrics that we use are out of date. They don't respond to net zero. They're old-fashioned. It's cost-benefit. That's not appropriate anymore. It's important, but I think there are other investment models that we can look at around health, well-being, quality of life, and delivery of a better well-being experience for the community we live in, and reflecting the true cost of carbon, because it doesn't reflect the current market price of carbon. It isn't reflective of that. Next slide. So yeah, what would success for this look like? Well, I think we will bring forward solutions. We will start to get a handle on scale and the commercial options available to us. And I think the market will be interested in this only if it's at a sufficient scale for the investment, and that there's risk. The risk is understood, and that kind of de-risking element is really important for investors. projectization of the framework for deliverability. So how do we actually do this, and how do we make sure that we do dig once or as infrequently as we can? By that I mean, how do we join up projects that are funded but that can be adjusted or augmented to deliver extra climate impact solutions as part of their delivery. And I think, yeah, engagement and awareness of what we're talking about here is really important, and this is the start of a discussion. We're at very early stages. Our thinking's not well evolved yet, but we'll certainly come back to you, and hopefully you will follow us on the journey here. And really getting your thinking, your feedback today would be welcome. And hopefully at the end of all of this and through the journey, we start to get a clearer vision of the path in this climate neutral innovation district that we're seeking to deliver. I think we're nearly finished. Yeah, so what next? So yeah, reporting in February, March. That might go out a little bit because we're already having issues around getting good data, because we're all exceptionally busy with another issue that's obviously in our minds at the moment. We want to engage with you. We want to give you access to the reports and the findings for this, and it is open and transparent. This is not secret squirrel. We're a university. We're taking a lead on this with the council, but we're kind of a neutral space with some knowledge and some ideas across academic and professional services. So we do want to talk and keep that discourse going and engage with you and the local community as well. So it's going to be hard work, but that's what we're here to do, and that's what we're up for. So yeah, I'll finish on that note. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Roddy. That was a fantastic presentation and a really good overview of the vision that you have for Glasgow's climate neutral innovation districts. I'd like to invite Gavin Slater to talk to you now from where he is, and I'll just share his presentation as well. So bear with us for a minute. But Gavin, maybe you'd like to just have a brief sort of introduction and overview of what you're going to be talking about.
Okay, thanks very much, Tom, and hello everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak in this webinar, and hopefully providing some bigger context to what Glasgow is doing across the city, that reflects on the work that we're doing with Roddy and the University of Strathclyde. I started with Glasgow City Council in 2009, and since then have been involved in driving forward sustainability, from what at the time was probably quite a niche concern, to becoming a much more focused situation that we have to address. And it's interesting listening to Roddy talking about the metrics that we use and cost benefit analysis, and how we need to move more to assessing well-being and socioeconomic benefits. I think that's a very accurate summary of maybe the last decade, where initially that's how projects were viewed. It was how much do they cost and how much is that going to pay back, how long? Whereas now this is a much wider, much bigger debate. So what I plan to talk about today is to give you a bit of background. If you just click through the slide, Tom, I think these will appear. Talk about the challenge for Glasgow a little bit, just echoing really what Roddy's been saying. And then I'm going to give you a summary of some of the things that we're doing, but there just isn't time today to talk about all the things that we're doing. In the last 10 years, sustainability has become so massive that it is involved in just about every strategic development that the city does. So the list is longer than my arm, and I don't have time to talk about it today, but hopefully you'll get a sense that the city really is driven to address the climate challenge. And if we really think back to that sort of 2010 period, at that time, in partnership with the University of Strathclyde, we launched the Sustainable Glasgow Initiative. That set about a target of reducing our carbon emissions by 30% by 2020 on a 2006 baseline. Now at that time, 30% was considered an incredibly difficult challenge. If you recall, at the time, everyone was talking about 20%. So the targets were 20, 20, 20, 20 by 2020. And we had gone that little step further to try and achieve 30%. And that was based on forming a partnership between the public sector partners, such as the universities and the council, but also incorporating the private sector as well, to try and build on that collaborative spirit and co-design and co-develop projects. Now, quite interestingly, that's at the time was an extremely difficult thing to do. There's a lot of challenges involved in trying to work together, even with the best will in the world. Challenges around procurement and ownership and risk and all of these things, which we still have to manage. But we are a good step forward, and I'm pleased to report that by 2020, not only did we exceed 30%, but we achieved a 37% reduction in our emissions in the city. So, you know, a lot of that is down to collaborative work, not only in Glasgow, but across Scotland, across the UK, that's helped us get to that point, and we need to continue on that journey. So in 2018, you may be aware, the IPCC published their report highlighting the desperate need for global action on climate change. And it set about a 10-year horizon in which we could act to avoid catastrophic change to our climate. In response to that, the Council in February 2019 established a climate emergency working group. And in May 2019, following the recommendation from that group, the Council declared a climate and ecological emergency in Glasgow. Now, that working group, with the help of a number of internal and external stakeholders, devised 61 recommendations aimed at getting towards a position of carbon neutrality by 2030. No small challenge at all. So if we jump onto the next slide, please, Tom. Following that, the Council set itself 2 targets. So it committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2030. And by carbon neutral, we're talking about CO2. And to become net zero emissions by 2045. So that's CO2 and all other greenhouse gas emissions. And if you look at the image on the right, of your screen, you'll see that in that time, and this only reports up to 2017 because the nature of data collection for carbon emissions for a whole city takes 2 years to collect and report. So we're always reporting 2 years in arrears. But you can see the progress that's been made in the city. Now, that's over 10 years. We've got another 10 years to get to carbon neutrality. The scope and scale of that, I don't need to emphasise, it's obviously considerable. So absolutely major transformative action is required. And it's required, as Roddy quite rightly points out, to be done in collaboration. It's required to be done by the city. This isn't a city council challenge. This is a challenge that we all face. And the city, to its best of its ability, can help to coordinate and manage and direct some of this work, but it really requires contributions. And the University of Strathclyde is a leading light in this term in terms of working with us and developing these types of solutions, as are the other universities and many other organisations in the city. But this is an unprecedented challenge, and that decade is rapidly running out. We've all been working from home since March or so this year, and this year, to me at least, it feels like it's disappeared. It's gone in no time. We're already on the cusp of 2021. So we have 9 years to achieve this target, and trust me, I used to have a lot of hair, but this is quite a concerning situation. So a lot of sleep is lost as we try to devise these solutions. And the net zero plan and the work that the university is doing, this is really a step forward, and it really aligns well with what the city's doing. On top of this climate emergency, we have the COVID-19 panic. And that really is pandemic, sorry, it has been a panic, but it's a pandemic. That really has kind of highlighted to us that while this has been a real challenge, it's also shown what can be done if we really put our minds to it and we react quickly. And it has changed certainly a number of the operating practices that we as a council have and our ability to enforce certain different changes. So you may be aware of the Spaces for People programme, for example, which has done things that previously would have taken an awful lot longer to do, but legislative breaks have enabled that work to happen swiftly. That kind of thing is what we need to do moving forward. So there needs to be an absolutely sharp increase in the scope, scale and intensity of this action. This pace of change is absolutely key to meeting these targets. On the right hand side again, you can see the breakdown of CO2 emissions in the city by sector. Now you can see that electricity has reduced massively. So the decarbonisation of the electricity grid has considerably contributed to our CO2 reduction. The gas grid, not quite so much. And transport has almost stayed constant. Believe it or not, since 2005, transport emissions have only dropped by 50,000 tonnes. So a lot of work still to be done, a lot of opportunities still to be met. We need to build resilience to local weather impacts resulting from the climate change. It's not only about reducing our emissions, but adapting the city. So, you know, Glasgow really suffers from rainfall, increased water, increased flooding. So we can see these acute impacts of climate change right in front of our eyes. And these are not necessarily about CO2 emissions. What we need to do is the type of projects that we have been delivering so far, like the municipal drainage partnership, like the Athletes Village, which uses SUDs in incredibly clever ways to manage that increased waterfall into the city. But you know, to meet these targets, we need to be adaptive. We need to have this capacity to adapt to climate change. We need to do the things that Roddy was talking about in terms of green economic recovery. But ultimately, from the city's point of view, what this is about bold leadership and substantial investment. The level of investment required here is huge, but also the requirement for leadership is absolutely, it's indelible. It must be imported into this in the most critical way. We need to act as leaders and we need to drive this forward. This is not just from the City Council, but we all have that opportunity to influence and lead on what we're doing. If we jump onto the next slide. So there are a variety of strategic documents, a variety of different projects, technical studies that we are working on to progress us towards net zero. And obviously all of this has been done under the sharp focus of COP26. And the sharp-eyed amongst you will notice that it says November 2020, it's now November 2021 as a result of the COVID pandemic. But if we just click on one, Tom, only this week, we took our Climate Emergency Implementation Plan to the Environment, Sustainability and Carbon Reduction Committee in the Council. And there was a huge amount of debate on this plan. This plan is only in draft format, but it sets out 52 actions, as well as responding to the 61 recommendations of the working group. It sets out 52 actions that we need to meet to drive forward to deal with the climate emergency. Post being at committee, this is now going to go into a public conversation. We are very aware that we are but a small number of people working in an organisation trying to solve these problems. And while we've managed under the restrictions of COVID to do a lot of engagement with stakeholders, this needs to be a discussion with citizens. It needs to be something that citizens understand and buy into. It needs to be something that businesses and institutions understand and buy into. So if you keep your ear to the ground, if you keep watching, you'll see that public conversation starting in the next month. And we really, really would hope that you would get involved and give us your feedback, give us your views, let us know, is the plan ambitious enough? Is it achievable? Is it realistic? That conversation is key to making this a success. Post that conversation, it will go back to committee before it goes to the City Administration Committee for formal adoption by the Council. If we click on another one, please, Tom. Oh, sorry, I can't see because I've got a list of people down the right-hand side. I've missed one there, which is the circular economy route map. So in the same committee, we took the circular economy route map and it was accepted by the committee, which will now go to the City Administration Committee for formal adoption. But the circular economy is a real key factor. And again, dealing with CO2 emissions, dealing with sustainability and dealing with the climate emergency. The way that the circular economy route map has been devised is all about sustainability and its core three pillars. So the economy, the environment and people. We need to understand how the circular economy can contribute to managing all of those things, to making sure that we as a city have a sustainable and green economy that maximises material use without, at the same time, minimising waste. So that document is now out in the public domain and I really encourage you to go and have a look at that. There are about 30 or so actions in there about how we move forward towards circularity. The route map has been widely praised. It's been praised by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We've been asked by ICLEI to be one of the first cities in the world to sign up to their circular mandate. We are being invited by the London Waste and Recycling Board to become members with them, to develop a formalised relationship with Zero Waste Scotland. This route map is the result of an incredible amount of hard work, working with the OECD and others to develop this, and it really is something that we're very proud of. So again, please go and have a look and come back to us with your feedback. The draft local heat and energy efficiency strategy. This is one that really chimes well with the work that Roddy's been describing. So in the local heat and energy efficiency strategy, which we expect to get to committee early next year, we're looking really at this and how we can actually achieve these targets of carbon neutrality and net zero, but also how we continue to absolutely reduce CO2. So carbon neutrality and net zero will always have an element of abatement in there, and an element of offsetting. But we want to continue on a path of dropping our CO2 emissions as much as possible through to 2050. So at the moment in draft, we're looking at an 80% reduction of CO2 emissions. It's improbable that as a city we'll ever get to the point where we don't emit CO2 in any form. So we must accept that there's going to be at least some emission of some sort. So we're trying to get that as low as possible. And this strategy is not really about finding that golden bullet, that magic technology that's going to solve all these problems. It's much more about looking at the technologies that exist and looking at the problems that exist as well about getting those technologies deployed. So in that, there will be 5 or 4 maybe now actually priority areas in the city centre being one of those priority areas, which fits very nicely again with the innovation district, to look at what technologies we can deploy in those areas, but also what business models we can deploy in those areas. So Roddy had spoke for a while about district heating. I'm a huge advocate for district heating. We do, as Roddy mentioned, have a number of district heating systems in the city, not only the University of Strathclyde, but the University of Glasgow, and the Athletes Village, as well as out in the northwest of the city. Really big 2,000 home connected systems right down to 100 homes connected. But not one of those has yet really reached out and connected any customers that existed before that did. And that's an issue because really, at this point in time, we don't have the experience that you have in other European countries where you have municipal energy companies that can manage and grow and develop and connect and charge and collect the bills for these types of things. And obviously there are a number of risks involved with that type of work. There's a number of experiences that we don't have in pushing that forward. So through the LHEs, we'll be looking at different models to mimic what we've seen happen in maybe the likes of Copenhagen, where you have concession zones in the city where developers can come and build district heating networks and seek the customers that they want to find to make that viable, but also protect the most vulnerable customers as well from being charged high prices for heat. So trying to create a framework that really enables the growth of district heating and the connection of various different heating networks together, providing more and more resilience, as well as looking at different sources of fuel for that heat. So, heat pumps from the river, ground source heat, deep geothermal, these types of things. If we jump on to the next one. So at the same time as the project here that we're talking about has been developing, we in the city have also been working with the Energy Systems Catapult, but also in partnership with the Connected Places Catapult to do a net zero scoping study for the city of Glasgow. So this will take a lot of similar concepts and ideas that Roddy has discussed, but looking at it at the city scale. So not just in one area, but the entire city. And this is the first time really that the two catapults have come together to work on something like this. The Energy Systems Catapult have long been one of the leaders and developers of innovative approaches to energy systems. The Connected Places Catapult brings in the previous Future Cities Catapult and the Transport Catapults to also look at those various other aspects that Roddy's discussed about transport and about well-being and about livability. So hopefully this is going to be quite a cutting-edge piece of work, which will then inform the actual net zero investable strategy thereafter. If we jump on one more. So ruggedized, this is a bit of a baby of mine. This is a £19 million project in partnership with various cities across Europe. So the word ruggedized actually stands for Rotterdam, Umeå and Glasgow generating exemplar demonstrations in sustainable energy districts. Bit of a mouthful, but ruggedized also refers to that term that the American military used when taking sensitive IT into war zones. They would ruggedize it to make it more likely to survive attacks and bombs and whatnot. But I think this is analogous to what we need to do for our cities. We need to ruggedize our cities in the face of climate change. We need to make them more resilient. So ruggedized works within the area of the Innovation District along George Street and Duke Street, and looks at various different measures for renewable energy, transport, street lighting, district heating, not so much in the infrastructure of district heating, but actually the sort of contractual model of district heating. So the University of Strathclyde owns and operates its district heating and is very keen for that district heating to connect out of the university and get other customers. Ruggedized developed a contract model to help them do that, but also to help potential future customers understand exactly what they were buying. Because as a city, as a country, we don't buy heat. We buy units of gas and turn them into heat. So it's an entirely new concept that takes quite a bit of understanding. That project, unfortunately, is going to have to probably run a year longer than expected due to the pandemic. So it should finish in 2022 now. But that really has shown some interesting things. It has developed a solar PV canopy that will sit on top of Duke Street car park, which will feed directly into a large battery storage unit, which will then use that renewable power to either power electric vehicles or to negotiate through smart communication systems with the power grid itself. So either discharging renewable power onto the grid or storing power for the grid or providing grid balancing services and other types of things. We're also integrating within the University of Strathclyde campus electric vehicle charging points into street lighting columns. So minimising the amount of furniture that's getting installed into the streets and maximising the use of street lighting columns, going beyond the concept of the humble lamppost. It's a very interesting project. It combines with another project from Horizon 2020 we have called Connecting Nature, which is more about developing nature-based solutions like the aforementioned SUDS system at the Athletes Village. But again, it's a testament to Glasgow as a real player in Europe in terms of securing these funding in these projects. If we click on to the next one, and I think this is the last one that I'm going to highlight, but again, Roddy mentioned transport, and transport's been mentioned quite a lot, and you really cannot disaggregate transport from the energy system anymore. More and more, the electrification of transport makes transport, cars and vehicles are part of that system. They are batteries. They are possibly resilience to that system. And the council is in the process of developing its new transport strategy. And we're in the process of a public conversation right now. And as it says, we need to talk about our transport future. And that public conversation is running through to the end of this month. And I encourage you all to go to the website and have a look and get involved in that and get your feelings put across about what kind of transport we need, how we make transport carbon neutral and climate friendly, how we make it a just system, how we make sure that we live in a 20-minute city where we are only 20 minutes away from the amenities that we need at any given time. Again, that contribution from citizens, from people working and living in the city is absolutely key and vital. Now, this is only a very small handful of the work that's going on at the council at the moment. We also have a plastic reduction strategy, which is dealing with single-use plastics. We have a new waste strategy being developed. We have obviously the low emission zone, which is now a few years in, and is doing a lot of interesting things in terms of managing the vehicle types that are allowed into the city. We are developing our new adaptation and mitigation strategy. We recently became members of the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, which really, along with our membership of the C40, takes the conversation from Glasgow beyond just Europe and international across the world. And that membership with the CNCA has been quite illuminating in terms of Glasgow's position as a leader, not just in climate science and action for climate, but really in our position as leaders in terms of working for social justice and for just transitions. Glasgow is absolutely determined that no one will be left behind in the transition to a low carbon economy. And that really sets us apart, I think, across the world, in that an awful lot of the world's biggest cities are focused on the right technology or the right business model, but maybe haven't quite focused as much as Glasgow has on making sure that that transition to these new business models leaves no one behind. Make sure every single citizen, every demographic is covered and cared for and is brought with us into this new future. We have an electric vehicle strategy. We have currently a developing strategy potentially for a new metro system in Glasgow, which at this stage could be any number of things. The process that we're going through at the moment is really evaluating what that metro system should be for Glasgow. We're developing a specific ecological response to the ecological side of the emergency, which will at a later date be consumed into the whole climate emergency response. But the ecological side of this, which is not perhaps discussed in quite so many, quite as importantly, I guess. I mean, Roddy mentioned it with the greening of the city and trees, but the reintroduction of species into the city, this is really important and a clear indicator of the health of the ecosystems in the city, and something that we're very concerned with managing correctly, potentially in line with how we manage vacant and derelict land in the city, which is something Glasgow has quite a lot of. Finally, just to finish off, we as a council are committed not only to trying to deliver these strategies for the city, but continuing to educate ourselves in the best way possible to make sure that we stay as close to the forefront of this subject as possible. Not for me, who's involved in this day to day, but for every other member of staff, for every other member of the senior management team, for all of the elected members in the city. We have recently been rolling out carbon literacy training with Keep Scotland Beautiful, which has been a really eye-opening experience for a lot of the elected members and senior managers, and helped them understand what can often be quite a confusing subject. I don't need to probably tell you, but the concepts of carbon neutrality and net zero can be difficult for people to understand, and often they become interchangeable in conversation. So that kind of education piece has been really important to the city to understand what's being discussed, and to help elected members and senior managers of the council to really help push and promote a response to the climate emergency. So I hope that's given some wider context to what we're doing in Glasgow, and shown how the work that's happening in the Innovation District is really a key aspect of that wider city work, and hopefully something that can contribute more to the wider planning and be replicated in other areas, particularly those identified in the LHEs. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gavin. That was really insightful and really great to get such a good overview of all the different initiatives that are going on. Great to see COP26 getting mentioned there as well. Where obviously many of us are aware that it's now been pushed back to November 2021 because of the pandemic. I do quite a lot of work myself within Strathclyde around COP26, and it is going to be a massive way of engaging, as you say, not just policymakers, industry, but the whole community and wider. And actually we had a conversation with Nigel Topping, who's the UK government's or the UK's high-level champion for COP26 a few days ago, and he was echoing that we need this whole systems approach to get everyone involved to be able to reach these targets, these really ambitious targets that we've set. So thank you to both Gavin and Roddy for such great presentations. We've got about 20 minutes left for any Q&A, and I've been seeing there's been quite a lot of questions already come through the Q&A function, which is great to see. So we'll maybe try and do a few of these or answer a few of these live. One for Gavin, just to start off with, do you consider water to be a climate impact emission?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question. I guess I think about the consumption of water and the management of water to be an absolute climate impact emission. Obviously, the impact of water consumption, water management takes a lot of energy. and the associated emissions that come with that. I'm not sure quite what you mean by it being a climate impact emission per se, but certainly the processes around water management and consumption have huge emissions impacts. But I'm quite impressed by a lot of the work that's been done by the likes of Scottish Water and Scottish Water Horizons to develop projects that look at water as a potential source of solution for the climate emergency. So we have done a lot of work in the last couple of years looking at heat pumps, both from using sewage as a source of heat, sewer water, and the River Clyde as a source of heat as well. And while both of those projects essentially were viable projects, we unfortunately never got them through to completion for a number of different reasons, but certainly water is a key consideration in any kind of climate emergency response.
I don't know if Roddy, if you want to come in on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's all around us, isn't it? Water, as I referred to in my presentation, and I think it's an opportunity as well as a challenge to manage and value water. It is a valuable resource, and it's got energy in it. We rely on it for hydro, and yet we've still got to manage it and manage the impacts around it. So yeah, it's very much in our thinking, and we value and treasure it, and we need to get as much from it as we can and not waste it. Back to Gavin's point about carbon literacy, we need to stop wasting, and we need to think about when we're brushing our teeth, washing cars if you've got one, your bike. I wash my bike occasionally. So, water use, although it rains a lot, it's a valuable resource, and we've got plenty of it. So why not get value from it and use it as a valuable resource that we can perhaps maybe, trade or, use for good purposes that help stimulate the economy.
That's great. Thanks to you both. We've got another question here, which is looking at the 52 implementation actions. Firstly, where can that be found? I think if we can provide a link to that, that would be really good. Also, how are they funded? So I don't know, that's probably more one for Gavin than Roddy. Yeah.
So on the first one, the 52 actions, if you're asking me where the report can be found, we did have some IT issues when it went to committee. So it should be available from the council's website through the committees. It's in the public domain now. If you have it and you've not found the 52 actions yet, they're in the appendix, as are the 62 recommendations. So they are in the report. In terms of funding for these, this is something that was discussed at committee, and where we are at the moment is these actions, they're not perhaps project actions like they are in the innovation district. These are much wider, more holistic concerns. So there are actions in there, for example, to support pension funds to look at divestment. That is not necessarily a costed action on the council. That is something that the council wants to work with the pension funds to look at their plans for future divestment and how they're going to do that. There are actions in there about meat consumption, something that uses farming uses a huge amount of water in meat production, something that I'm very keen that we manage as a vegetarian. But again, it's really more about benchmarking and understanding meat consumption in the city, promoting local farming, local produce, local food use. And again, there are lots of things going on in that area, and it's about coalescing these things into one strategic way forward. So it's not necessarily a fundable action. In terms of some of the more concrete actions that do require funding, then that funding still has to be identified. It can't be on Glasgow City Council to fund all of these things. There are plenty funds out there. The government just announced a £50 million LCITP fund for low carbon heat and integrated energy systems. So there's two themes there. There's another fund for low carbon housing demonstrators as well. There are funds out there that we can tap into. So it's, again, much more about trying to coordinate the approach to these things, less of a piecemeal fashion and more of a coordinated approach to doing that. And it's done, sorry, Roddy said, it's about de-risking a lot of these things as well to make them investable. And that's our position. You know, growing district heating through the LHEs is not necessarily about the council funding that. It's about presenting the framework, the development framework and the business framework to allow operators to see that as a valuable and viable investment to come in and make. So if we can limit them through KPIs and management to certain costs for domestic customers, we can hopefully open up their ability to go and attract other customers at whatever cost they need to manage that at to manage their business. So, you know, a lot of it is beyond just the conventional, how much does this cost and where do we get the money? It's much more about how do we really drive these things forward together collectively. But yeah, that and the circular economy, they're both in the public domain. If they're not available on the council's website, please let me know and I will get you direct links to them.
So we've had someone come back on that. They're saying there's a live link to the working group recommendations, but none to any appendix to the 8-page cover paper.
Yeah, so there's an actual, the circular economy is about 90 pages, I think. The climate emergency one, maybe about 70, if I remember rightly. But that, as I say, we did have some IT problems yesterday with getting access to it. So I will get you a live link and we can distribute it through this this seminar as soon as it's available.
That's great. Thanks, Gavin. One point I want to sort of pick up on there, and this is from my own experience of being involved in pension funds. In terms of things like ESG, how important is something like ESG to all of these initiatives that you're proposing, and a lot of the sort of the plans and the papers that you put forward? You know, how would environmental social governance sort of feed into that from a, I suppose, from a pension fund point of view, but also from a more sort of financial point of view?
Well, I'm not going to kid on for even a second to be a whiz at finance or how pension funds operate and invest. And I think what we're clear about in the implementation plan is that there needs to be a conversation about that. And we need to understand quite clearly how the pension funds are thinking. It's crazy to think that they're not already in this space, that they're not already considering where they're investing in the future for the sake of their members. It may be that we need to talk to them about how they evaluate what's of value to their members and the length of investment that they're looking to. You know, some of the things that need funded to take Glasgow on that transition to net zero, could they be funded by pension funds? You know, these are long-term projects. Could that pension fund money be reinvested actually into Glasgow? Again, I don't know the answer to that, but what we're saying is we need to have those conversations and we need to be able to understand where that money's going. We're not for a second saying either that companies that were historically fossil fuel companies should be blacklisted and we shouldn't be investing in them, but we should be trying to make sure that what we do invest in, or what pension funds invest in, is the decarbonised sections of these companies. So a lot of these companies now are changing what they do, what they develop, that, you know, that could be invested in. And you know, I know from supply chains and everything else, it's very difficult often to track exactly where that money's going. But really, it's about having that conversation. It's about having a divestment strategy moving forward. And I don't for a second believe that every pension fund isn't already thinking that the future investment will be decarbonised. They're already in that space. It's maybe just about trying to tease that out, understand what it is, and then make that more publicly understood.
That's great. We've also had a question here about the sort of sharing of lessons learned, both positive and negative, from the project. And I suppose this would probably equate to across the various projects that you've both alluded to in your presentations. So I'll maybe come to Roddy first with that, if that's okay, and then Gavin feed in afterwards.
Yeah, well, definitely want to make, you know, the kind of lessons learned and the experience available. I did mention already that, you know, getting data is challenging, and fitting this into people's existing workload is one of the reasons for that. But yeah, we need to learn. I think what we're trying to do here is kind of bring forward the proposition to let the market see what's out there, what key stakeholders in the city are doing and thinking, and you know, we are talking to a lot of the key players in this city space. So even that is a learning curve in terms of, you know, how you build relationships and make it real for people to get on board with a proposition. So I think we've already succeeded that way. And that's probably down to hard work over a number of years, and building up those relationships help to bear fruit from good communication, clarity of purpose, trust, deliverability. All of those elements are I've already learned that, you know, and I think we've got lots to share on that. I'm very happy to keep that sharing going. We have a communications piece in the work, and that's why I was referring to how we make this real, visually appealing for people to see and understand and to get involved with and to give feedback. There's so much consultation goes on anyway that we don't want to get lost in the mix, but it's definitely something we want to do.
Yeah, I think in terms of lessons learned, we are members of, you know, a huge number of networks through which we do constantly share lessons learned with other cities and towns, not only in Scotland, but across the UK, across Europe, and now, as I was saying about the CNCA and C40, across the world. And it's immensely valuable, both, well, I'd say it's more valuable for us. I think I learn more than I teach. But, you know, I think there is a value to the other cities that do hear from us, but we're members of the Scottish Cities Alliance. And through the Scottish Cities Alliance, you have the chief executive of each city council sitting on that alliance. Each of them has been tasked with a specific theme to manage. So for Glasgow, it's about waste and the circular economy. I'm the responsible officer to work with the chief exec on that. And that is all about taking the lessons learned in our city and co-developing strategies with the other cities. In this instance, about circular economy, but there's also about district heating, about renewable energy, about transport. So there is a constant requirement on us to share. Even the European projects that we're involved in, like Ruggedized, require that we are constantly disseminating information out through our partners ICLEI. We have a Ruggedized website, there's a Connecting Nature website. On that, there are reports of every deliverable that we've worked on. There are, you know, 2-page kind of brief summaries, and then there are 100-page technical reports on how we've delivered our database decision platform. You know, there's every level of information available depending on what information you require, if it's high level or if it's really detailed, but it's a core concept in what we do. You know, we don't work in isolation, we don't exist in isolation. We need to constantly be developing things. Working with Climate Ready Clyde, for example, we are working beyond the boundary of Glasgow as a city, but into the greater Glasgow conurbation, with all the, you know, neighbouring associations and neighbouring authorities to try and develop strategies together. And that sometimes is something that we are going to them and telling them something that we've done, or it's something that we're going to them and telling them something that we want to do, and we want to do that together. So yeah, lessons learned, as much sharing as possible. I spend an awful lot of my time presenting to people about these things and talking about it, and you know, it's of huge value to me personally. I learn an awful lot through that, but it's also of huge value to the city to get that information and understand as well. Glasgow as a city, we're not actually that great at blowing our own trumpet, would you believe? We're quite modest when you compare it to other cities that are, you know, really verbose about how great they are, and sometimes when you scratch the surface, it seems to be not quite as good as they might have presented. So I think we do well as a city. We're well received as a city, and we are really engaged in a lot of these networks. And COP26 is probably the biggest network that we're involved in now, and the eyes of the world will be coming to look and see exactly what is happening in Glasgow and what we've been doing, and we'll be taking every opportunity to learn from everyone that comes, whether physically or virtually, and learn from them and share our experiences.
That's great, thanks Gavin, and I totally echo the COP26 point. it is going to be a fabulous way to emphasize what Glasgow is capable of, and these projects and everything that we've mentioned, as well as a lot of the work that's gone into these webinars, will be something that we'd like to share and bring to COP26 to inform the sort of the message that we give to the world as to how Glasgow and how Scotland, I suppose, is looking at these kind of climate change, climate emergencies, and thinking about how we can better move forward with sustainability in mind. So I'm afraid we're getting close to the end of our webinar. Just before we go, I'd like to thank both of the panelists, both to Gavin and to Roddy, for some really inspiring and fantastic presentations. I'd also like to thank everyone for the questions as well. It's been a really good webinar, really well received. We've had almost 30 questions, which is fantastic. And I know Roddy's been typing away like a little IT warrior on the chat function, trying to get to all of these, which is really good. What I would say is that we do have several webinars left. I'm just going to share my screen with everyone, just so that you're aware. We've got one webinar on tomorrow, actually, on the One Ocean Hub, and we have another webinar next Monday, which focuses on children in education. So I'll just share the link to that just now, so you're all aware. And I would encourage you all to please sign up to these, as they are fantastic. They're fantastic webinars. They're fantastic pieces of content to be able to show to colleagues and demonstrate the kind of work that we're doing in these spaces. So there's the link there to Friday the 9th, 1 till 2, Building Bridges for the Ocean, Transdisciplinary Research for Development for the One Ocean Hub. And Monday the 12th is our final webinar in this series, Inspiring Children's Futures. I hope you can join us for those two final webinars. And thanks very much for joining us today. Thank you very much, and have a great afternoon and great weekend when it comes.
Thank you.